welcome to Post Break. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm an executive producer at Nice Shoes and the board secretary at the Post New York Alliance. Today's topic is scripted to unscripted, how to stay nimble in turbulent times. Now to introduce our moderator, he's a producer, editor, and writer. He was an editor and associate producer on Korean War Stories with Walter Cronkite, which won a National Documentary Emmy. He edited the financial crime documentary Fruitcake Fraud, which was nominated for a Real Screen Award. And he's worked on multiple episodes of The Price of Glee, which was on Discovery Plus, and Death by Fame on Max. And his latest work is Murder at Carter County Mines on Discovery Plus and Max. Please welcome Mike Noble.
Hi, everybody. I was going to put like a Blade Runner in the back there, but I figured maybe it was a little bit too on the nose. But yeah, so we're here today to talk about, how to basically have open pathways to multiple forms of work, and how that can keep you kind of basically employed through turbulent times. And here to talk with us is Liz Yale Marsh. She's an Emmy-winning documentary film and television producer under an exclusive overall deal with Universal Television Alternative Studios to spearhead documentaries and premium series for the studio. Liz recently produced the feature documentary Little Richard, I Am Everything, directed by Lisa Cortes and executive produced by Rees and Rolling Stone, which premiered opening night at the 2023 Sundance Film Festival and was released theatrically by Magnolia Pictures. And also, we have Jamie Kirkpatrick, and he has been at the forefront of New York's independent film scene for over 20 years. His diverse filmography includes such notable titles as Lost in Translation, Dave Chappelle's Block Party, The Inevitable Defeat of Mr. and Pete, which had a special screening at the Obama White House, My Friend Dahmer, and John Leguizamo's recent critically acclaimed directorial debut, Critical Thinking. So, Jamie, I wanted to talk to you first about your experiences moving from scripted to unscripted in another turbulent time.
Yeah, so that other turbulent time was back in 2009. So, we were like just kind of at the beginning of the housing crisis and the financial collapse. And in the course of, let me think about this, in the course of 4 days, maybe 5, I went from getting a job on a feature. By 2009, I'd been a full-time editor for about 5 years about at that point. So I was still relatively, early in my career. I'd done a handful of movies. But I had gotten this, it was like a $7 or $8 million kind of action-y thriller with a, decent LA cast. I had met with the director. They were all in town prepping. I was just kind of in that, waiting period of like, I knew what my start day was. And so it was Tuesday of the week before I would have started on Monday, the first day of shooting. And in the course of a few days, the director just stopped returning my texts. And my texts were basically like, hey, like we still need to I need to lock down like a cutting room, like I've got places on hold, just need to know, like, can I pull the trigger? Like who should I talk to? And after a couple of days, I was like, this is weird. So I finally like sent him a text being like, hey, like, what's up? Like, why haven't I heard from you? And he's like, and the response was, oh gosh, Jamie, I'm going to call you in a few minutes, which is like never the text you want to get from like any employer, right? Long story short, he went on to tell me that in the course of just a couple of days, the bond company had pulled out because of the cascading financial crisis. And then like a couple investors pulled out, and like within just a couple of days, like a $7 million film, like just folded, like just completely went away. Everyone was already in town. The crew was all, in like deep into pre-production. But so it was horrible for everyone, but I was like, and that job would have started like in October. So I kind of knew, like, if I don't find a job in the next month, I'm not going to have a job for the rest of this year. So I scrambled. I mean, literally that day, just like immediately got on the phone, started calling everyone I knew, and it was clear really quickly that there just weren't going to be any movies like scripted. This was before the boom in streamers and stuff. So if you weren't on like an established TV show or a feature, like, you probably weren't going to be working in scripted. So through 3 degrees of separation, over the course of a few weeks, I was put in touch with someone, and I ended up taking a job on, this not so much reality, but a nonfiction show, a hotel renovation show called Hotel Impossible, that was pretty popular on Travel Channel at the time. Like a host-based thing where they send this guy to struggling hotels, and then over the course of an hour, he fixes them up and makes them great again. And everyone learns a valuable lesson. So, but I knew nothing about that world, nothing. I didn't watch those sorts of shows. The people who hired me just kind of seemed impressed by my resume, and never really got deep into, like, so can you actually do this kind of work? It was, and I kind of knew enough to essentially keep my mouth shut. And this is the part where I'm going to be, really brutally honest, as someone who had really only worked in scripted and some commercials and music videos, but never in that side of like nonfiction, television, especially. For the first couple of weeks, I was miserable, completely lost, massive anxiety that I didn't even know I had, like, kind of came roaring out. I mean, I just felt like a complete fraud. And didn't understand how that world worked, where it's like, oh yeah, there's no script. It's like, if you're lucky, a producer has done like a string out, which is, just a raw, they've cut out all the extra bits, but it's basically like, these are the general story points that happen at this point in the show. Make it look good. And, that means music and B-roll and all these other things. And so I had to figure it out on the fly. And I did, but it was a very, very difficult, steep learning curve. The irony was, by the time I submitted that first cut, like for review, in a room full of people, and I thought, 100% certain that was my last day of work, because I just figured they're going to go, okay, great. And, privately they'd be going like, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And then instead, what ended up happening is they basically were like, can we give him all the other episodes, like, to work on and tighten up? And I guess, I was completely shocked by that. And I think what it probably signaled was just that my outsider nature, or I shouldn't say outsider, but the fact that I was coming from a scripted background where story is like such an important part of what I did, of making sure the movie or the show like made sense. Apparently that just translated well to what I was doing. So I guess it was a skill I didn't even know I possessed at that point. And then obviously that was a bit of a confidence boost and allowed me to go forward. And I ended up working on that show for almost a year. Then did get a movie, did that movie for, the 5 or 6 months I was on it, but it was still slow at that point. That would have been around 2010. And then I ended up going back to that show for like another season. And I just can't stress this enough. Like, it saved my life. I just would not, it's very possible that I would have left the industry. Sorry, I'm shaking my desk. Had I not had I not gotten that job, because it actually paid better than most of my tiny independent films that I was doing at the time. It wasn't union. That was a bit of a problem. So I did kind of like, I had to transfer to my wife's corporate healthcare at a certain point. That was a big pain in the ass, but I was so fortunate that I could do that. But I was actually making okay money at a time where most of the people I knew were like really out of work. I mean, out of work for like for months and months. So, now I look back at that time, I'm so grateful for it. I mean, I was like, I'm proud of myself that I stuck with it, because in those first 2 weeks, I cannot tell you how many times I was up out of my chair on my way to tell the producer, look, I'm the wrong guy for this. Like, I'm not your guy. Like, there are better people to do this than me, and I'm just slowing you down. And all those crises of confidence that I'm sure we all have at times. So it was a really valuable lesson just as a person for me to also realize, like, you can't listen to that voice, right? Like, don't talk yourself out of a job. That's something I talk to my assistants about all the time, because I know once I experienced that for the first time, it became very obvious to me that, like, oh, I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this. I'm sure everybody has those moments. And I just think, like, what would have happened if I had actually walked out there and just like quit? It's very hard for me to see what my future would have been that next year or 18 months had I done that. So, it's so I'm incredibly grateful. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it off, is that the other thing that I value so highly about that experience was that while I was there, obviously I was part of a team of editors. There were, 3 or 4 other editors on the series, not always the same people, but mostly the same people. I realized that, while I had a certain skill set that I was bringing to the table and that people clearly seemed to appreciate, some of the people I worked with were miraculous editors. Like, I just could not believe the skill level, the sequences that these people could put together from nothing, right? Again, there's no brief or script that says, in this scene, we want to see all the graphics of all the previous hotels or whatever. And, these people just out of their own creativity would go, oh, it'd be cool here. And, I found it stressful to try to chase them and to mimic what they were doing. But nonetheless, I learned so much from that team. And when I then did go off to do that next movie, on the second day, it became obvious to myself that I was a much better editor than I had been when I finished the previous movie before I had done this TV job. I had skills and a speed. And when I say speed, it's not just about how fast you operate the Avid or whatever. It's about how quickly you're making decisions, right? And not spending all the time going, should I do it this way? Should I be in the wide? Should I be in the close up? Because when you're working in that TV world, you kind of don't have the time to do that sort of thing. So it's a singular moment in my career that I value maybe above all others. Even though I didn't choose to continue in that world full time. Ironically, part of why I'm on this panel is I'm back there now for a little while, but not on that show, but in that world. So it's an incredibly valuable lane in our industry.
Yeah, thank you. Liz, I know, you have a similar story, and it happened around a similar time. So please tell us.
Sure. Yeah, I think nimbleness is something that Jamie was talking about that feels very resonant to me in my career and the turns that it's taken. I was coming up in my early part of my career, right as the writer strike happened in 2007. I was at New Line Cinema at the time. I had every intention of being a screenwriter, and that was what I was going to do with my career. And that started to sort of fall apart quickly. Of course, leading into 2008, the next horse I decided to jump on was the publishing industry. And if anybody remembers 2008 and the crash and the fall of the publishing industry, was not a great time either. But what I had been doing at the time was actually at Endeavor, doing book to film adaptations. And then when Endeavor and WME and William Morris merged into what is now WME, my department was a sacrifice of that merger. And so I found myself young and without a job and without health care, living in New York City with rent to pay, and trying to figure out what to do. And I had 2 job offers. One was to go work at the Weinstein Company. And I was in a privileged position at that moment. Luckily, I knock on wood for that all the time now, that I knew a little bit more than I think others did about what was going on at the Weinstein Company back in 2008. And my other job offer was at a company called Radical Media, which was a commercial production house. I'm sure many of you have worked there. That was at the time, it had been making documentaries, but really moving more and more and more into that. And they were doing a show called Iconoclasts at the time. And for a number of reasons, but the least of which was not just I didn't want to go work at the Weinstein Company. I needed a job. I went and took the job at Radical Media and fell in love. And in the course of my time there, I actually ended up doing both scripted and unscripted for them. And so that was, I was going back and forth for quite a bit of time with my own sort of creative brain bandwidth. And so I got to live in that experience of doing both. And I will say that one absolutely informs and educates the other, to Jamie's point, that both are fundamentally storytelling mediums, and it's about how you take those raw materials and shape them. And I think the tools that you use are a little bit different in both. And I think that not having a script, not having that path is what was always exciting to me as a producer in docs, and why I gravitated towards spending a lot of my time with doc editors. That was really fun from a process standpoint, to get in that edit and to look at the raw materials together and decided, okay, how are we putting the story together? What are we going to do? And ultimately, that's really the path that my career took, was staying in that documentary lane. And what I've been trying to do with my work, and what I see more and more happening, is more of an intersection between and a completely new way of making documentaries. I think that prior to the 2007 writers' strike, there was sort of this one way to make a documentary that felt very PBS, right? That like it was our parents and our grandparents' documentary. And I think that the influx of scripted talent into the documentary and into the unscripted world that happened as a result of 2007's writer's strike actually really transformed the industries in ways that we're feeling more and more recently than even we did then at the time, which is the narrativizing of the documentary medium, is bringing in scripted elements, bringing in scripted DPs. We're seeing that across the board. So I think that there's a lot of room to bridge both.
So, I mean, that does bring up a question. And I believe that there is probably some anxiety in the unscripted world that maybe there's not enough work to go around. I don't know, Liz, do you want to chime in on that? And what are your feelings?
Yeah. Sure. No, I mean, I won't be Pollyanna-ish about it. The industry is messy for everybody right now, and difficult for everybody right now. And I in the 2 decades that I've done this work, have not seen the industry anything ever like this. So whereas in 2007, we did have a really big rise of unscripted content. We are not seeing that here on the unscripted side during this writer strike. What I think we're seeing is a large scale reset and recalibration of the industry as a whole. I think that there was a bit of a runaway train effect because of the rise of the streamers. And now there's a balance and a resetting. So we also have a lot of buyers that are gone. Showtime is gone for us. HBO Max is gone. CNN Films, who I produced my Little Richard documentary with, who I thought was absolutely one of the best homes in the game, they are gone. HBO Max, I think I said they're gone. So we are now looking at a huge constriction in places to sell things and places to make things. What that does is raise the bar. I think the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, well, you can only sell if it's really packaged with a celebrity or it's known intellectual property. And that's not true. Those things do count for a lot, but it also means you got to bring your A game. And producers really have to come to the table with strong projects if they're going to break through, and something that feels derivative or something that feels like it's been done before at a million different places. It's not going to have that same, like, great, let's do it, just because of certain auspices attached or because of the need for stuff to fill hours that maybe used to exist. So that is where there's more of an opportunity for more people to come in to help push the medium forward and to help make ideas more creative and more exciting and bring something different and dynamic to these projects. But the competition is going to be really, really tough out there for the jobs.
Yeah. Jamie?
Well, I would say, I mean, it's really interesting. I think from the, like, I don't know if it's the right term, but the kind of like maybe more like long form nonfiction stuff. I mean, everything Liz is saying sounds right to me, feels right to me. You know, my only kind of counterpoint, I think, would be in the, you know, I still think of it, I mean, kind of the way I refer to it is like the kind of basic cable shows, right? Like, I know it's, I mean, it is still that to some extent, but like these like bread and butter reality / nonfiction shows that, you know, are kind of on every channel. Just because of, you know, I've just recently, in the last few weeks, started on a nonfiction show. It's not reality, but the company that's producing it does a lot of other shows. And one of their executives was telling me that like all their shows got renewed. So I also think that whereas the thing that Liz is talking about, it's pushing the attention to these, like, you know, because the reality is the sorts of shows I'm working on, like, they're not, relatively speaking, they're really cheap to produce, right? Like, it's again, relatively speaking, you can do a 20 episode season for the same amount of money. I don't know. I don't produce these things, so I don't want to say, but I would imagine as like the same amount of money as like a fairly decent sized feature documentary, or certainly like a bigger, more prestige nonfiction, doc based like show, like multi-part show. And those companies are happy just to keep like cranking them out, because they do tend to be fairly formulaic. So the flip side is, I think there's still plenty of work in that field. Yes, Liz touched on this. What it does mean is like, look, the vast majority, 90% of the scripted editors I know, and that's a lot of people, they're all, it's funny, most of them are still currently working, but only for a small, like a little bit longer. Like they're all on things that are ending in the next like month. So depending on what happens with the writer strike, a potential SAG strike, things like that, what you could see more people doing essentially what I did back, in 2009, which is like, scripted editors trying to get some of those gigs. So I've had a lot of people reach out to me just individually, generally younger people. I think enough people in our kind of circle know that I had dabbled in nonfiction. So I do hear from a lot of people going like, I've been doing all these jobs in, reality or nonfiction, and just like, how do I, I really want to work in film or independent stuff. Like, how do I do that? The advice that I've been kind of doling out the last few months is pause, like pause that dream, right? Not cancel it, not throw it out, just pause, because now is the wrong time for you to try to make this big transition. If you've already got your foot in a world that's probably not going to have a major shakeup, right? So that's kind of all I was going to say. Is like, if, for the folks out there, anybody listening, if you're like, oh God, do I really want to do another season of this reality show I'm on, where like the whole reason I joined the Post Alliance is so I can meet more people that do features and, Apple TV shows and things, like, fine, hang tight. Like, as Liz and I and Mike and, those of us who have been around a little longer can tell you, like, these things are cyclical, right? They come and then they do go. Right now, for some of you, this may feel really, really scary and kind of feel like the end of your professional world. It never is. That's how it felt in 2007 and 8 and part of 9. And I'm not saying that to like be coy and say this is going to last that long. I mean, the one thing that makes me a little hopeful was we are not in the same situation we were then. Then we had a global financial crisis. Everyone was out of work. Every industry was having massive layoffs. What sucked for us was, as Liz said, we were on the heels of a labor dispute, right? Of a writer strike then. So there was already, the pipeline had already been interrupted when everything else shut down. This right now, knock on wood, we're not in the same situation, right? Things are a little iffy with the financial, the global financial situation, but it's still generally pretty healthy. So this thing will shake out. It may be a little while. And I understand if you have just graduated from, film school, or you've just finished your first job, like, I get it. I get that that's like, it's a lot easier for someone like myself who's been doing it a long time to just say, like, just be patient. It's going to come around. It always does. But I promise you, it always does. It will get better. Right.
And I really appreciate that kind of anxiety soothing because it's definitely needed right now. And I do want to say, though, I mean, I've talked to you both about this separately, and it feels like you've had different experiences about, is there a work shortage right now? Liz, what do you think? I mean, are people experiencing trouble at the moment? And then I guess the next question to that would be, what practical advice do you have for people who are?
So in my side of the business, which is that sort of premium doc limited series side of things, I think we have seen a pretty significant constriction in buying right now. That's not to say that there aren't things still getting made. There's sort of a pipeline effect, right? So I think a lot of people see things coming out right now and they look, everything's fine. All this new stuff's coming out. And you have to keep in mind that those things were made or bought years ago. My Little Richard documentary will come out on Max in the fall of this year. We sold that in 2020. So it takes a pretty long time to see the effects of those things. And so I do think that right now a lot less is selling. And so there are a lot fewer jobs. I am seeing that. I have seen more people, editors, producers, directors reach out to me looking for work, who are currently out of work in the last few months than I've ever experienced in my career. It's been a pretty significant increase as far as just the number of people who are out of jobs. I will say, though, just so that this isn't like too doom and gloom, and to do a little anxiety soothing myself, I do think that this is, we all know with storytellers that it's in these moments of darkness where the light emerges brighter and stronger than ever. So I do think that whatever roles you end up taking during this time to get through will serve a tremendous purpose. Knowing and understanding that a lot of you are in new jobs and have recently graduated, I'm sure you may have. I remember my parents who were obsessed with resumes. I don't know if anybody else has parents who are obsessed with what your resume looks like. And it's like, oh, well, you'll never get hired if you have this or that. And it's confusing, and make sure there's no break. Ignore that. That is a antiquated way of thinking about the job market that the people in hiring positions don't think about anymore. And the people who do think that way won't ever be looking at your resumes because they're very, very high up. People understand nimbleness. People understand movement and getting lots of different kinds of experiences and the inherent value of that. And so there are ways, just as you think of your own brand identities as editors, that you can be telling a story about yourself coming out of this moment. I think that's really important, is not to come out of this and say, well, you know, I was the writer's strike, so I took a job editing some crappy reality show that I didn't really like, and now the industry's back. It's owning it, and the way that Jamie does, and talking about how it made you a stronger editor, how it makes you sharper, how it makes you faster, how it increased your storytelling capabilities, and really leaning into it and advertising yourself that way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too much into my own story, but I will say that I recently had a documentary go dark. It had nothing to do with any strikes or constriction of, streaming services or anything like that. But it went dark through practical purposes on the documentary. It was with a mutual coworker of ours, Liz. And the thing that I really value is that I've done so many different types of work. I've done corporate work, I've done promos, I've done, docs and series. And because of that kind of variety, I also have friends who are in a variety of different fields. So when I find myself in a situation where, like, oh my God, I don't have any work, I can, it's easy for me to reach out to those people. But so, yeah, I was wanting to look at Miriam's question here. She asked, what kind of advice do you have for describing yourself and the work that you have done when you have worked a variety of roles? And I think that's an interesting question. I've noticed that sometimes if I put out the variety that I've done, that actually works against me because people tend to be wanting exactly the role that they're looking for. Jamie, I think you got a lot to say about that.
Not a lot, but listen, yes, it's true. Unfortunately, right? It always makes me laugh. Well, that's the wrong thing. It always makes me crazy, is what I should say. That, like, an actor, right, who, Meryl Streep is, right, she's Meryl Streep. She can literally play any role, right? She's played old, young, American, foreign, you name it, heavy, slim. We all understand, like, what Meryl Streep does. She's, and she's celebrated for it, right? As actors are, actors who can disappear in a role and do a ton of different things. She's funny, she's serious, she can sing, she can, like, as editors, it is literally, and so I can only speak as an editor. It is literally the opposite for us, right? It's like, well, but have you edited a vampire musical comedy that's all shot in one take? Because that's what we're making. And that's what we're looking for, right? Like, I've basically had people say that to me. Like, something that specific where you're like, no, I haven't done that exact thing that you're making, but that doesn't mean I can't, right? But I'm telling you, I cannot tell you how many, like, party conversations I've had where that's been the very strong implication coming from the person I'm talking to. Just as a quick aside, like, when I years and years ago, when I first started with my agent who happens to be in LA, she asked me, she said, what do you want to do? What do you see for your career? And I don't remember exactly what I told her, but I went off about some sort of kind of independent film, or who knows, but But at the time, and I'm going to preface by saying, obviously, I have nothing against like this movie or the person that worked on it, but I think you'll understand the reference. At the time, Adam Sandler was just starting to put out all of his comedies, and I was like, I was saying what I wanted to do, and I said, I just don't want to like be the guy that like cuts click, right? There's like these like, and my point was like, I'm not interested in like goofy, broad studio comedies. Like that's the one thing I just like, it's just not my thing, right? And she laughed and she said, well, fair enough. She goes, I don't see that for you either. But let me just tell you something that might be good for you to hear at the start of your editing career. While he's not our client, I know the guy that cut click, and he has a really big house in Hollywood. And what I understood, what I like took away from that, right, was like, right, so you can choose to be, you know, a jack of all trades or a generalist or whatever you want to call it, and like try to work on lots of different things. But that is probably like when you're the person who is known for that thing, your phone is going to ring every time someone does that thing. And I have seen that be true with other, you know, professionals I know, other editors I know. It is true. If you're the horror person, you're going to get the call on every horror film. If it doesn't mean you'll get the job, but you'll be in the running, right? Whereas like I might have to fight to be in that running. So, you know, it's up to you individually, right? I have decided at this point in my career and my age, yeah, I'm fully aware that I've probably, you know, left a lot of money on the table on certain kinds of films because I wasn't willing to repeat that. After I did My Friend Dahmer, guess what? Ton of horror film calls, even though it's not a horror film, like not even a little. Nobody dies in that movie. And yet somehow the feeling in the industry was, because it was popular, was, oh, like this is a guy that does horror movies. But I kind of knew, I was like, well, if I don't turn these down, that's what I'm going to end up doing for the next decade. So, you know, there's a trade-off, I guess, is really what it comes down to.
If I can, as the person who is often asking if you have experience making the musical vampire comedy, I will give a little bit of advice to everybody here, which is always operate as if the person potentially hiring you is very busy and very lazy. And don't let them ask that question.
Yeah.
So yes, everything Jamie just said is 100% correct from my side of the industry. I will always go to people first who have really big credits in exactly the type of thing that I'm trying to do. And the good news though, for everybody else, is there actually aren't a lot of them. There aren't a lot of people who are that amazing, and they tend to be really busy. So then it's about, okay, now I'm going to talk to everybody else. And people like me who are producers, we don't have time to watch a lot of things. We don't have, and we don't want to have to ask those questions. We want you to tell us. So I understand that you're making a movie about singing vampires and it's really humorous. So you should look at this thing I cut at 15:05 of this. You'll see this hilarious comedic moment that I cut. And over here on this one at this time code, you'll see that. You don't need to tell them you've never cut a vampire musical comedy. You don't ever bring it up. There's no yes or no to that question. It is a preemptive look at these things that I have done that position me really, really well for this job. Because otherwise, a lot of us are in a position of looking at previous work that we understand that you've done, having absolutely no idea what you cut or what somebody else cut, and just kind of being like, how's the vibe? Like that's what we're making decisions on a lot of the time. So the more that you can tell a producer who you want to find a job with, exactly why the work that you have done does speak to things, even if it's a completely like indirect, go for it. It will really help them. And if you make somebody's life easier, they will assume you will continue to make their life easier once you get into that edit, because you understand what they need, what the needs of this job are, and are a team player and a go-getter. And that carries a lot of weight.
That's great advice. Great advice.
Yeah. Yeah. And practically, I will say for me, I've noticed that, when I send people work samples, it really is the fewer I send that are more directed to what they're looking at, the more chances are that I'll get a reply or an interview. And also, I'm not plugging a particular, a company, but Vimeo is very good in that it has collections that are really easy to tailor. You can have 100, 200 videos on Vimeo and really easily create a nice, sharp looking collection to send to a producer or an EP. And it does help. I wanted to start seeing if anyone had any questions. We're kind of like 15 minutes out. But before I did that, I just wanted to ask real quick from both Jamie and Liz. We've kind of talked about this a bit, but we've talked about it a lot. There is a lot of anxiety right now. And what kind of good do you think can come out of this particular moment in time in our industry for both the scripted and unscripted worlds? Jamie?
Well, maybe this, Liz said, I also don't want to sound too, over dramatic or Pollyannish, but listen, I can tell you, I first started in the industry in I call it 97, 98. So, a fair amount of time. I've seen a lot of strikes or potential strikes from various. The one thing is, we are in a singular moment in our country of how labor is viewed, right? I've not in my professional lifetime have I ever seen anything like that. Especially within our industry, with the kind of unity that seems to exist within and throughout the industry, from the Teamsters to the actors to the editors, et cetera, et cetera. I've never seen that, not one time. I remember everyone I knew grumbling the last time the Teamsters struck, because it was shutting down the shows and we were having to go on hiatus. I'm hopeful. I hope it's not naivete on my part, but I'm hopeful that this groundswell we're seeing of us, capital U, us as workers, all going, no, this is not acceptable. It's not okay for you, X corporation, to be making billions of dollars of profits when I'm working 14-hour days and, with no, with no benefits or whatever. So I really do think that we are kind of at a tipping point. What will come from that, I'm not certain, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I actually think it's a really positive thing, because there is this recalibration of how workers in general, especially now in the entertainment industry, are viewed and how their contributions are viewed.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. Liz?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we've both now used the word recalibration here. And I think that it's kind of the word of the moment. There's a great New York Magazine article that Mike and I he was texting me about the other day, that's worth everybody taking a look at, just about sort of the end of peak TV. And I think we were in a tech bubble and it's burst. And now everybody needs to pick up the pieces and figure out what the industry looks like from here. Because quite frankly, the absurdity of the whole thing is that some of these companies aren't making billions of dollars. You have some of the most successful shows in the history of television, and it's actually not leading to any real monetization. So And yet we have executives taking these massively inflated salaries. So the whole thing it needs a recalibration. And I do hope that we see that. I think creatively, I also hope there's been this period for the last few years, I think, because there does seem to have been a lot of work to go around. And it seems like, money to go around, that we've created a lot of schlock. And as we have this recalibration and we figure out where to spend money, being smarter, being more judicious, and then paying people properly for the work that they're doing on those projects is something that I would really love to see. I think part of the thing that I see, on the doc side, for those of you who might be in the doc editing alliance, the doc editors have said that doc editors need 1 month per 10 minutes of a project, and that is what should happen. I have not had 9 months to edit a doc ever. So, I think that, and it's because of finances. It's because, and it's not like, anybody else is making a lot of money either. It's just that's how films are being structured and made. And so I do hope that we can sort of all get together as labor forces, as producers, as directors, as writers, as everybody on the team, to start figuring out, like, how can we actually make budgets that work, that everybody can actually make what they are trying to make in a meaningful way, in a way that doesn't kill you. And the other thing I will say, and I saw this question pop up, and I know Mike, you'll moderate questions in a second, but like, any tips for hobbies, other things to do. And I know this can feel really hard when you're starting your professional career. Work is not everything. You have to make money and you have to survive. You have to pay your rent. You have to eat. You have to feed your dependents and house them and clothe them. But I hope that this also reminds people, because they're forced to focus on it, that it is not the be all and end all. I think sometimes we as content creators forget that we're not brain surgeons, because we are under so much constant pressure, and it feels we have deadlines and people are yelling at us. And I know as editors, you get like the brunt of that, where we're like, go, go, go. And can you work this weekend? And can you work till 2 a.m? And I think that as we all take this collective moment, a breath and another recalibration of what priorities are and what balance look like is really, really key.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. I mean, I that's my hope too, that we'll get both an increase in quality out of this moment in time, and also an increase in just, accept, really, even more than the money. It's the acceptable amount of time that people spend on a project. Sometimes you get lost in a project and you work 14 hours and you don't care. Other times you really, really do care that you're spending that much time on something. And when there's no way out of it, it can be very painful. But yeah, this is great. I was going to go through here. So this is a very good one from Miriam. She's asking, beyond networking, is there any advice on where to look for work when you are early in your career? She's done things on Staff Me Up and various websites and Backstage, and joined local filmmaking groups. But yeah, sometimes, I mean, I've not had a ton of experience with job sites. I'll be honest. It's really, I get most of my work through other editors or other producers. And unfortunately, that's the whole, you've got to do it before you get it kind of thing. But they do, I don't want to disparage any of those job sites, because some of them actually do work, and I know some people who it has helped. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I've never found anybody from any of those websites, just to be fully transparent. It's always been through word of mouth. But there are more specific places that I've gone to look for editors. So obviously this doesn't apply to everybody, but there's Brown Girls Doc Mafia is a place that I have gone to specifically to look for editors. There are various groups that could fit who you are, or the type of work that you've done. how you identify, that I think that you should absolutely try and seek out. Because to Jamie's point about sometimes people want something very specific in the person that they're hiring, they will go to specific places to look for people. Obviously, this group that you're part of right now, places you can post and look for postings. So I've often found if I'm looking for an editor, I will ask another editor to post, to make a posting in one of the various networking groups that they are on, that they will, either just field responses to for me, or hopefully, so they're not bogged down, just, pass those straight along. But that I think is the stronger way, probably. I would not rely, unfortunately, I know this is being recorded, so staff me up, please don't come at me. I've never used it.
Jamie?
I mean, everything was said. I totally agree. Because most of the jobs you're going to get on something like Staff Me Up, or, I mean, again, if you're just starting out, fine, but they're going to be very low paying, not great jobs. Listen, I mean, I promise I'm not being paid to say this, but I mean, this group is probably, I'm a part of various other kind of industry post groups around New York, some through the union or whatever, but I'm just telling you, like, this community of people is uniquely suited. It's essentially why it exists, right? I mean, if you've ever been to one of our big events and heard Jen Lane kind of talk about its origins, I mean, it's like this whole group that's, I don't know what our total membership is now, but started with like 2 or 3 people sitting around like, a bar table being like, who do you know? Like, who's good? Who's a good assistant? That's how this group started, like, a long time ago. So that's what it's all about, right? And it is the fact that, like, it's unlike certain, say like with the Guild or something like that. It's not just like the workers, editors, right? There are post supers, there are post producers, there's coordinators. So there are people at both sides of that equation. There are people who are looking for people and people who need work, right? So all I would say is, like, especially obviously, these last couple of years have been tough for everyone, including this group. There's still a lot of opportunities out there for the in-person events. And I'm telling you, that's where it's at. Like, go to those events, go to the facility tours. You're gonna, force yourself to introduce yourself to the people you don't know. Don't hang out with your friends. That's not what those nights are for. And get to know as many people. And I'm telling you, at some point, somebody's gonna go, oh, I'm looking for someone for ... And, like, I mean, every time we have a pig or something, we hear those stories, right? So it does work. So I guess that would probably be my best pitch.
Oh, that's great. Zach has a question here that I think is very common in this group. But it's funny, when we first described this meeting, it was going to be called Scripted to Unscripted Pathways, with the emphasis on pathways, because it really is about being able to find paths, from one place to another. I do think that enriches you. Maybe you don't become the click guy that way, but I do think you have a richer life that way. Especially as documentary editors, we're just like, inside worlds and as many worlds as you can get in. That's great. But Zach's asking something completely different, basically asking, what's your advice for going the other way if you want to go in, from unscripted into scripted? Just, quick advice.
Yes, to me, obviously I hear this question all the time, which is fine. I get it. It's very simple, man. It's like, just cut everything, cut anything you can. Your job at that point in your career is to build out your reel, because you got to have something somebody can look at, right? Short films are really the way to go. And I don't want to sound like the old curmudgeonly guy, but when in my day, like, it was really hard to meet filmmakers, really hard. I mean, the internet was in its infancy, if it even existed yet, but I mean, like, it was very difficult to meet filmmakers. Now, if you've got a little bit of hustle and, you know, are willing to put a little bit of time in, there is literally no reason that you can't reach out directly to, you know, I'm not talking about, you know, some major movie director. I'm talking about somebody whose short you see at Tribeca, or, you know, buy the passes for Sundance Online. Watch those short films. If there's one that impresses you, track that person down and let them introduce yourself. You know, with social media, it's like, it's just not, there's almost no barrier to that entry, right? So I tend to find it's like, I think that's a big thing. It's like, you know, find a way to cut some shorts. The film schools, if you're in New York, we've got 6, you know, great film schools all within spitting distance. So it's like, you know, you can do your homework and have a little hustle, and you can find ways to get your hands on those projects.
Yeah,
Really, I just want to underscore, like, utilize social media. I recently had an experience where I didn't even realize I wasn't friends with a DP that I hired, because she'd been following me on social media and liking things and sending me notes. And I was like, oh, yeah, we must be friends. I had no idea. I never met her. And then ended up wanting to hire her on something. So you reach out to people. You don't have to be overly ambitious about it. You don't have to, if they don't get back, don't worry about it. If they don't care, you shouldn't either. But you just try reaching out to people.
Yeah, and don't take people not getting back to you personally. The people in our industry are so busy. Like,
Busy and lazy.
Yeah, some of them. But I know people who have 2,000 unread emails in their inbox. You know, it's just the nature of Jamie's raising his hand. It's just the nature of our industry. So try not to take things personally. It's not always easy. That's my advice. How are we doing, Chris, on time? Are we going to be wrapping up?
Yeah, we're
2 minutes.
We time warped up to the top of the hour. We've got about 1 minute to wrap up.
I guess Jamie and Liz, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And then just, I don't know, any last thing you want to throw out? You got 30 seconds each.
I would just say again, I mean, what I said before, like, you know, for those, because I know there's a lot of anxiety out there. I promise you guys, like, you know, we will all get through this. It always ends, right? It right now, everybody, and the press loves to fire up these stories and make everything sound very doom and gloom. And, you know, it may be a rough patch, but like the stuff will come back. There will be jobs, you know, just a matter of patience, really.
Yeah, this too shall pass. And I would say, I know Mike spoke about this a little bit, but the last sort of word of advice I'll leave everybody on also is look for other jobs, editing jobs outside of even traditional media. Executives are doing that. Executives are going into tech jobs. They're working for companies like Masterclass. Look at websites that need you to cut cooking demonstration videos. Look at things in every single industry, nonprofits that you care about. Contact a nonprofit that you care about. If you need to build something in your reel and say, hey, listen, could I help you out with something and donate my time and I'll cut something for you? It's a way to build your reel and to give to something that you care about potentially. Look for nonprofits that actually have money to pay you to cut things. There is a lot of work out there when you start to look a little bit outside our particular industry that's a little in crisis right now. And then remember, this too shall pass.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. I'll let Chris wrap it up.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jamie and Liz, so much. This was fantastic. It went by so fast. And thank you, everyone who showed up. We will see you again in July. Bye-bye.